All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Easter Eve live stream, and we have a special treat today. We have a guest, Alex Strasser. He was here with us like a few weeks back, and at the time we were discussing more morality, and we hadn't had a chance to discuss the existence because it kind of is. It's a necessary precondition, you can say, of the of atheistic morality that you have to be able to show that God exists. So he's back to have that discussion, and I'll go ahead and um, open the floor for our usual panel: Neil, Blarg, John, and Stevo. Hey guys,
Howdy.
how are you guys doing?
I do good tonight, guys. Yeah, can't speak.
Always good.
But Alex, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I
Because you're
guess
busy, right?
yes, it's been a semester, but it's about over with, so that's good.
That's good.
Oh, nice. Is your finals coming up?
Yeah, they're coming out soon, but for me it's mostly manuscript deadlines and projects and everything, so
Oh, wow.
not 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 typical finals.
You're going
I
for your
see.
master's?
PhD now.
PhD.
Ooh,
Yeah.
So this is a
And
big
what
one.
year are you on?
I'm in my third year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 more to go, right?
Hopefully two.
absolutely, sir. I could make it 4 years undergrad.
Yeah. Can't get enough of it. I guess Joe isn't Joe isn't here this time, so I'll be the only one with my camera on, I guess.
Yeah. I
That's a,
find it a little bit harder when we have multiple guests because I want to make sure all the guests can talk, but it's a little
that's
bit
fair.
easier when there's only one.
Fair.
But Alex, you said you had some slides or something that you want to share.
Sure, I have some
Um,
slides I threw
okay,
together. Yeah.
you should be able to present it.
Okay.
There should be an
Sounds
option to present, and then you can and once it's up on, I can add it onto the stage once you
oh,
have it
okay.
ready to go.
Um,
So I don't know if you want to do that while while you're setting up. Let me just get our usual kind of pre-show chat going on. So Neil, Blarg, John, Steve-O, what's been going on with you guys?
Hey, all.
Same
Can you hear
thing.
me this time?
Oh yeah, we can hear
Yep.
you now.
Oh, were you
Okay.
talking before?
Yeah, I did try talking before, but apparently that was not working. I was just going to berate all of you people in America for being behind the times. It is Easter, where myself and Neil are. It's been Easter a long time here, but it's just
Well,
ticked over for Neil.
excuse
So
us.
Oh,
yeah,
my bad.
just you lot are living in the past. Is all I
Fine, I
have to
don't
say.
care.
Well, I think we need to kind of set Easter based on the time zone that Jesus Christ was in, right?
Which is where
That's right.
it is Easter there, not where you
Yeah.
are. Well, though technically you could argue that a lot of people believe that Trump is the new risen Messiah. So
Just
that why?
because you cause people to say, oh my God, does not mean you are God. A small but pertinent distinction.
Are there more than 4 people on the face of the planet that believe that? I sure hope not.
oh, it's a disturbingly large number, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Hey, hey.
So just to kind of give a quick update on what's been going on with Dad.
Oh, yeah.
So the
Yeah.
nursing care facility has started being comfortable with him having longer and longer home visits. So I had family in town last weekend, and he was home for the entire day. His weight is down, which we're a little concerned about, but definitely his appetite is good and strong. And we're looking at trying to get him actually home sometime right around mid-May. So we're going through the process of making sure that we've got everything ready to go here at the house. And so I mean, his spirits are up. He's definitely, chomping at the bit to get home, to get back to his routine. He's bored out of his mind at that facility, which is actually a good thing. That means that he's not like used to being there, which is what we were worried about.
Well, what do they have him do during the day when he's there?
So most of the time, the big thing is his going through physical therapy. Because his balance was off. This all got started because he fell 3 days before Christmas. So they want to make sure that his strength is up, that he's able to walk on his own, that they minimize the tilting. Thanks for the kind words. And making sure that they minimize the risk of him, coming home and then less than a week later falling and having to go right back. So that's what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, one step at a time right now.
Literally. Yes, him learning to work on his own again is a step-by-step process.
Yeah, they probably have data that when people go back too early, that they're more likely to hurt themselves.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we're at. We want him back. We want him back as soon as possible. And I am not a fan, just for my own personal background, which we don't need to go into tonight, but my own personal background is I'm just not a big fan of nursing homes in general. So I was never a fan, but I also recognize the necessity of what he's going through right now. And yeah, I just want to make sure that he's home literally safe and sound.
I don't blame you there, buddy.
Yep.
So I guess I didn't realize the one true religion was the food is, or God is food guy. So
Yeah,
I
just
can't
checked.
keep track of all this. Oh, did you?
Yeah, he
Okay.
changed his
Nice.
name again. Yeah,
Okay.
and went and looked it up.
Was him. Okay.
Alex, I don't know. You probably don't know, but this guy's his theory or his demonstration that God exists is that we have food or something to that effect.
So
Because
top-notch.
God is food.
Okay.
I did see something where it was like a picture of a confessional where I think like the woman on one side is saying, so God, oh shoot, what was it? I'm gonna have to find it, but so I won't ruin it right now. But I'm gonna go ahead and put Alex's slides up here. I don't, Alex, if yeah, why don't I just turn it over to you? You can kind of give a preamble. Yeah, maybe you can have it in slide mode or something. Yeah, that's good. In fact, what I'll do is I do it like this, but yeah. So you can go ahead and start and kind of give us a background. So why don't we give time to Alex to kind of make his case, and then once he's done, we can have a discussion on what he's presented. Alex, do you have kind of sense of how long you think it might take for to present this?
So I can kind of adjust as so desired. But yeah.
Well, I mean, if you kind of took your time, how long do you think it'll take?
Let's see. I guess my full slides are, I don't really need that, 25 slides, but because I just was throwing out two arguments, the fine-tuning argument, moral knowledge argument, and then I would talk about the problem of evil a little bit. And yeah, I can kind of adjust as so desired, speeding through some things more than the others, but
yeah, why don't we do it in section where you present your first part, and then we can have a discussion, and then we can go to the other parts one at a time.
sure, that sounds good. So I can just start with fine-tuning, and
Yeah.
we can go from there. All right, cool. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for having me on again. So hopefully we'll have time to get to like three things. Maybe we won't, but yeah, I guess I'll just jump into fine tuning. So I think there's essentially like three pretty like really good arguments for God's existence: fine tuning, moral knowledge, and then some version of the cosmological argument. And I just narrowed in on two of these to kind of fine tuning and moral knowledge both are like morally significant, I guess. Um, so I guess I wanted to focus on those. So just starting with some definitions by theism or like God's existence, I'm referring to a creator of the universe with a few characteristics, one that's personal, all good, and then very knowledgeable and very powerful. So I mean that to be like neutral between, or yeah, kind of agnostic with like, uh, yeah, very knowledgeable or infinitely or omni. Like I kind of don't really care about the specifics, but it would have to be knowledgeable enough to create like our universe, which is kind of already an unfathomable large amount of knowledge. But yeah, then by naturalism, I guess there's a bunch of different ways to define this, but I'm just going to say that there's no supernatural entities, which I guess is some could be tautological, but anyway, there's a lot of different ways to cash this out. Hopefully the exact argument doesn't differ too much on what exactly this means. Usually it's an emphasis on scientific method as our approach. But yeah, so there's no supernatural creator. So that would at least be entailed by naturalism. Okay, so then when it comes to fine tuning, this I'm going to be working with like Luke Barnes's argument. So this is given in Bayesian terms. So this is like Bayesian, Bayesian argument comparing probabilities. So this is a conditional probability. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, you have some evidence E, and this is how likely is some evidence given conditional on some theory, which is either naturalism or theism, and then some background knowledge, which in this case is going to be fundamental physics. So the evidence that we want to consider is our universe is life permitting, which in this case means like all the constants of our universe are life permitting constants or take on life permitting values. And then we compare theism versus naturalism and we look at fundamental physics. Okay, so the structure of the argument is based on Luke Barnes's argument. So we're going to do theory comparison in the context of some background information. So if it's true that the probability of some evidence given one theory in our background is much greater than the probability of that evidence given some other theory in the background, then that evidence strongly favors the first theory over the second. And then, so then the likelihood of a life-permitting universe on naturalism is very small, vanishingly small, but on theism it's not vanishingly small. So that existence of a life-permitting universe strongly favors theism over naturalism. So that's kind of like overall structure of the argument. So we can look at like a few of the fundamental constants in physics. So I'm going to focus on two, cosmological constant and the Higgs expectation value. So looking at the cosmological constant, I have lambda, but rho is the dark energy density, which is, they're kind of map onto each other. But okay, so if you have this ratio, then it's bounded very tinily. So if it's larger than 10 to the negative 90th, then it's expanding like too quickly. So you get some like very diffuse soup of only hydrogen and helium. You have no interesting structures in the universe. If it's too small, then the universe is going to recollapse. So there's just a very narrow range. So this star is like our value. These are log scales. So this kind of shows how narrow of a range there is. Okay, so then we give a uniform distribution of our we kind of say naturalism is not informative as to which value of these constants it should take on. So we apply a uniform distribution over some Planck limit. So this is kind of like what's physically reasonable within standard model of particle physics. So then we get that the life permitting value of this constant is the likelihood that it would be life permitting is like at most 10 to the negative 90th. So that's pretty tiny. And we can kind of make a similar type of point about the Higgs expectation value. So if it's too small, then the hydrogen's unstable with respect to electron capture. So if it, if the electron gets absorbed, then it converts like a proton to a neutron, and that would not be good for stability. And then, if it's too large, then you can't even bind nuclei. So you don't have a periodic table of elements. You just end up with nothing interesting in that universe. So this is like another constant. In this case, we bound the distribution between 0 and Planck mass because negative masses don't make any physical sense. And then we get like 10 to the negative 33 for the Higgs, the likelihood that it would be in a life permitting range for the Higgs value. Okay, so those are two examples. You can do this for like 20 or so constants that are the fundamental constants. So how do we think about this in terms of comparing like naturalism or atheism and theism? Maybe we want to differentiate between the two, but whatever. Okay, so this is just setting up like a model scenario. So consider some constant that can take on range from 0 to 100. And then only values 25 to 50 are the anthropic range, which are the life permitting range, and everything outside of that is not anthropic, not life permitting. So naturalism isn't informative with respect to which constants or which value the constant should take on. So when we consider the probability density distribution, it's flat across all possibilities. And so in this case, this made up scenario, the life permitting universe fraction of universes is 1/4. So 25 to 50 is 25 out of 100, 1/4. Okay, so then what theism seems to do is theism kind of smushes that probability distribution to a more narrow region. And the reason why is because I defined theism as being a personal creator. So if something is personal, then it's going to have some type of interest in personal interactions and relationships, and also defined theism as being all good. So a good creator would be interested in creating valuable things, and living beings are valuable creatures, and persons are extremely valuable creatures. So this would give some additional reason for God to create in the life-permitting range of universes. So this is kind of like a probability smusher towards the anthropic range. So I give that constant a name, or a label, lambda, for what fraction it is, and it's hard to know exactly the exact value here, but just that it would probably smush this probability density towards the anthropic range, because we can list out these reasons that would be particularly interesting for God to create in the life permitting range. So that leads us to suggest that the probability given theism is much stronger than given atheism or naturalism, which is non-informative with respect to the constants. So we would get a flat distribution. Okay, so then our conditional probabilities that we observed earlier are probability of a life permitting universe given naturalism and the cosmological constant, and their background knowledge is 10 to the negative 90th. For the Higgs, it's 10 to the 33. So if those are probabilistically independent, I guess, then you get a very tiny value. And on theism, we've given some reasons to think that God would create something in the anthropic range much more than a flat distribution. and so we have reason to think that probability given theism is much higher. So that is a good stopping point for part one, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that was good. By the way, I did remember. Sorry, I don't want to distract too much from it, but this is what I was thinking of when we were talking about that guy, the God is food thing. So Christ's body is bread, yes. It rose from the grave, yes, because of yeast.
Please leave.
Nice.
All right. Okay. Anyway.
Solid.
All right. So I think the good thing is, I think Clark probably has a lot of comments on this.
Yeah, he's
So-
I have notes as well.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, please. I'll start in the.
Let Blarg go
Can I
first.
start in the easy place, which is the non-technical? So if we consider the graph that you had earlier with a sort of a quasi-normal looking curve that you placed in the anthropic area, would you expect that if God was creating the universe, he would place each of the constants exactly on the point of the top of that curve in the best possible location for each constant? Does that make sense?
I don't know exactly what you have in mind with best possible.
So there will be a range, and there'll be a place within that range that results in the best possible outcome in terms of producing people. You wouldn't expect it to be some random place within the range of possible, within the range of universe parameters that allow us to exist. A God that can define what the parameters are would be defining the parameter at the best place, wouldn't it?
I guess that I would think that that God, the probability distribution would probably towards best, but I don't know what you have in mind with best. Is it
shouldn't
clearly?
it be? I guess the question is, shouldn't it be perfect?
Yes, it should
perfectly
be perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah, not somewhere in the range of possible, but perfect. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I don't see much reason to think that things like dark energy density, certain values of dark energy density are going to result in like less evil in the world, if that's the kind of thing that you have in mind. Is that what you?
Not going there at all. So,
Okay.
QC, did you want to pop up that bit by bit my previous couple of posts talking about the cosmological constant?
Is it this one, starting with this?
Yeah, starts that, yeah. Because a recent paper came out.
Before you go that, let me just put my comment about what perfect means. So instead of it taking billions of years for Earth to form and the solar system to form and the Earth to be habitable, why not have it perfectly tuned so that it happens within a relatively short amount of time? Let's say not immediate. Maybe there's some actual constraints that God has to work with, but let's say within millions of years instead of billions of years.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't we expect that if the tuning was perfect?
I guess is the thought that would create more people in the long run if you just have more time to create more creatures. Is that
No,
why that would
not
be
that as
valuable?
much as if things kind of happened by kind of naturalistic processes that we're aware of, it makes sense that it would take billions of years, with the various parameters of gravity and whatnot. But if it was actually fine-tuned, as in perfectly tuned, these things should be able to form almost instantly. But I'm not saying instantly, but in a much shorter time frame than what we observe.
Yeah, I guess unless the appeal is to increasing the amount of value in the long run, I guess why think
I'm
that like
sticking
it's a
I'm
good
sticking
thing?
strictly to kind of the physics of it, not
Mhm.
necessarily values and all that, because I have kind of issues with that as well. But just
Mhm.
the physics of it, just the physical processes, because you're talking about these settings that are supposedly fine tuned, but for a god it should be perfectly tuned. And
Mhm.
if these things are perfectly tuned, billions of years, and also the whole huge amount of kind of empty space and all these other places that don't have life, it really doesn't make sense for a perfectly tuned universe.
Yeah,
If
to that point, you talked about the universe permits life, and since we can only talk about our observations about life on this planet because we have no other examples from which to pull. We don't have life on Pluto. Is basically where I'm going with that. But considering that we don't even, unless we directly intervene, if we don't create our own livable spaces on this planet, we can't even fully live on this rock, let alone any of the other spheres in our own solar system, which is before we even get to the rest of the universe. So to say that the universe permits life, all of the evidence would seem to point towards us being the exception, not the rule. And I would really like to hear your response to that.
yeah, I
Oh,
think sorry, was someone else
Because
gonna
if
say
the
so
universe is fine, if the universe is fine tuned for life, why aren't we on the moon? Why aren't we on? Why aren't we? Why does it take 3/4 of the planet to have enough water? Like, do you see where I'm going with this?
I think I get the basic idea.
Yeah, the basic idea is that uh, the basic idea is our own planet is openly hostile towards us in the desert, in the North Pole, South Pole. Like, we can't live wherever we want on our own planet unless we take our own agency and change the environments of areas on our own planet to be able to live on it. There's a very tiny region that we can live on without any real interaction on our own.
Mhm.
That would seem to be counter to your own argument that the universe is geared towards life.
yeah, I don't have a particular problem with the fact that the Earth is not a great place to live everywhere, because the usual argument is that that they're making is that that the universe couldn't have life anywhere, couldn't even have stars, couldn't have matter. That's the sort of claim that's being made. It's not that it's comfortable, but if we're going to talk about it being perfect, then you'd expect there to be life in every single star system in the entire universe. That would be and that doesn't seem to be the case to the best of what we can configure.
So yeah, that's sort of the key sticking point that I have before we even get into some of the assumptions that you're making for your statistical analysis of the probability for the universe being fine-tuned versus naturalistic.
Mhm. Yeah. So why? So yeah, I agree with what Blarg was saying that I mean, so we're comparing theism and naturalism, and I guess so if you want to say that it's like a kind of understated evidence, but I guess naturalism predicts zero life with like a very minuscule probability of no life.
Well,
Theism
I
predicts
would
at
push
least.
back on that.
Yeah. So, first of all, again, the undercutting of your argument is right there. First of all, even if we accept at face value what you're saying, the problem that you have is it's non-zero. since we can't rule out now, based on your own math, even if we say it's microscopically small probability, it's still non-zero. And so we can't, since we can't rule that out, but your argument on your thesis seems to be hinged on, well, it's so small, therefore we're just going to ignore this.
Yeah, there's also a major problem with the Bayesian mathematics in this, because you have to apply a previous probability of the existence of God in order to make that calculation that God was responsible. And that just can't be done. The number could be 0, and then it doesn't matter how well you approach things from any other angle, you're always going to have 0 with your Bayesian math. So you can't. It's kind of a circular argument to get to God that way, because you need to first demonstrate some rationale for choosing God having a certain probability of existence. And if God is more significant than this universe, more complex, more than even if the probability isn't 0, it's less likely than this universe. So Bayesian doesn't get you there. But I wanted to talk about this paper that I put up, and the reason for asking the question about wouldn't gods make a perfect location? If we have a look at this, so this is a recent paper that came out in 2024, peer-reviewed, which when it go into the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. So a pretty solid organisation with an enormously long history. And what it shows there, see the vertical line at around 10 to the 0?
Mm-hmm.
That is the current value of the astronomical constant. And then the probability distribution graph in the left-hand side shows the probability of life, of generating observers in a given universe at any point in time as a function of that. And you notice where the peak of that graph is. It's around 800 compared to the value of 1, which is 10 to the 0, which is where it currently, which is the observed value. So and then you have the cumulative distribution function on the right hand side, which is that says the probability of life existing in this universe is 0.5%. Based upon this. So it's not only is it not perfect, it's actually a very low probability location. Now, the thing which is interesting about that, and the point where this would lead you, is that this is actually, and look, the paper doesn't talk about it, but this is actually what I would argue is extremely good evidence of a multiverse, because a multiverse producing near infinite numbers of universes, it doesn't have any inclination to create a perfect. We would exist in a universe that is just possible. So the likelihood that we fall somewhere outside the perfect range, but we're somewhere within the allowed range, is exactly what you would expect to see in a multiverse. It's not what you'd expect to see if an all-loving, near infinitely powerful, infinitely knowledgeable God was to create a universe that was perfect. This is not the graph that would be produced. So this is not fine-tuned. It's not even close, and that window is at least 6 orders of magnitude wide, in which it could exist. So that is a very large range of probabilities, or a very large range of values that it could fit anywhere within there. There's no tiny So the whole idea that it's 10 to the negative 90, as you said, just blows straight out the water and goes 6 orders of magnitude in the other direction. So so that claim has got to be wrong by 96 orders of magnitude.
I guess I'm just using pretty standard numbers that have been published in various physics papers before.
But the problem with all of those numbers is that they always do the same sorts of things. They fudge, and there's lots of problems with them. As I said, for Bayesian statistics, you first have to start with just some number that you assign as the probability of something existing, or the probability of an event, and then you update it as you get new knowledge. That's how Bayesian statistics work. But in this case, you can't start with that, because what you're trying to do is prove God by starting with the probability that God exists. That's a clearly circular argument. We don't have that problem in naturalism because we exist. We're here, we're asking the question. So we actually start with the probability that naturalism is right as a probability of 1, and then you adjust it from there. Whereas you can't do that with God.
That's definitely not how that works. You definitely can't just say probability of 1, we exist, therefore naturalism probability of 1. That's definitely not how prior probabilities work. You do need prior probabilities for sure. And
the prior probability that life could exist is 1. And then you can go along and make modifications to that number.
That's not what a prior is. A prior is before you consider evidence. So you can't just say we exist, therefore we're just going to do everything from that. A prior is before that. So you can appeal to some principle of indifference, which is pretty common.
You're not trying to work out the calculation that life exists. You're starting from a probability. What is the prior that you're working with? What you're trying to calculate is some probability that a given parameter of the universe would lead to life. And you go, well, obviously life exists, so we have to start with that prior. And now we can then go and have a look at things such as other pieces of evidence to update that value.
Well, we're not trying to update the value of whether life exists. We need to figure out.
No, you're trying to, but
probabilities of naturalism and theism.
Yeah, but we know that life exists in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So best guess we have for what's the probability that before you start looking at what the cosmological constant's value is, before you start doing that, you have to assign a probability that cosmological constant is of a value that will allow life to exist. And life exists, so clearly the answer has to be 1 as our prior. It has to start there. Because we have nothing else for it to start from. We know life exists, so that's the question we're trying to ask. And then we can go and update it by looking at what is the range of possible values it could have had, and things like that. So then you do your updates. When you're doing the same for God, what is the probability that God exists? You've got a 0 to start with there, or you've got a 1, or any value in between. You've got to pick something as a starting point there, and it can't just be it's either or. Therefore, we'll call it 50%, because that's some sloppy work.
We can't just. So we need to consider the prior of naturalism and the prior of theism, and life existing doesn't tell me anything about naturalism. And if we put in
no, you're trying to work out whether the universe could exist naturally by looking at for example, the cosmological constant. Is the value of the cosmological constant something which you would expect to see? What's the probability of life existing because of the value of the cosmological constant? Well, the life does exist. We know that's true. So we start there, and then you begin to look from there. You can multiply it by as tiny a number as you want, you know, to update that value. You could multiply it by a 10 to the negative 90 if that's the correct value. But it starts from that position. We know life exists. That's the thing you're using as your evidence of your prior. That clearly, whatever the value of the cosmological constant is, it must allow for life to exist. So, and then what you're trying to do is establish whether the number of that is actually going to be due to a natural cause or an unnatural cause. So you start at 1, but in the case of the God claim, you can't get a prior on the probability that God exists. You can't.
Our physical theories don't entail that life exists. So putting
why do you say that? Why do you say that our physical properties don't allow for life? I mean,
because I can look at the standard model of particle physics, and like there's nothing about there's nothing in within the model that entails that life exists. And so what particle physicists
why would you expect that? Why would we look to particle physics for life?
Well, because that's like that's what we're trying to figure out about, like a naturalistic approach to the world. So we look at
it's a fallacy. Is it composition or division? I can never remember which is which, but arguing that by looking at one particle, you can establish whether a collection of particles will behave in a sort of given way. You don't have
talking about different levels of physics here.
See, the thing is, you're basically saying we don't see life in a particle, therefore you can't say that the standard model of physics gives you life. And you go, well, no, life is not made of monads. You're not claiming that you would find life in like tiny, infinitesimally small bits of life in a particle, and then when you add enough of them together, you get a living creature. That's not how we observe the universe to operate. So you wouldn't. It's basically by looking at a hydrogen and oxygen atom. You're saying, well, we wouldn't expect wetness. You don't find wetness in those particles, so wetness must be magical.
I'm not really talking about emergence, or I guess like how things, come together and create something new, like such as life. I just mean when we consider.
Let's look at it backwards. We're in a universe where we know life exists.
That's the point. Yeah.
All our models. Our particle
must get that conclusion.
Are based on a universe where life exists.
That's not the aim of what these models are trying to do, which try to explain like what these constants are.
Yeah, that's right. But you have to start with a prior, and where do you dig the prior up for the value of what the value is? The problem you've got there is you don't know what the possible range of values are. So you've got a number that's very small. Is it let's say you have a constant that has a number that's 0.01. That's the value of this particular constant. Therefore, it could be any value between 0 and 0.01, or is it that it could be any value between negative 0.01 and 0.01, or is it that it could be any value between 0 and a billion? You have no way of saying what the range of those possible values are in order to get a range in which it could be.
Sure, we just look at the theory and see what makes physical sense. So things like negative masses don't make physical sense, and things outside of the Planck constants don't make any physical sense.
Are you sure that negative mass doesn't make sense?
I mean, yeah, this is like the positive energy congestion?
Yes. See, there's a whole lot of sort of leaping to conclusions there without all of the data. And it's, so there are lots of places where you have these sorts of problems in declaring what it is. Here's an even larger problem. Can you define that the cosmological constant is actually a constant that isn't dependent upon some other collection of constants, or some emergent property of some other collection of constants, rather than being a set thing? So we don't. Can you even name a single constant in all of the known constants of the universe that we know is not dependent upon any other constant?
Well, I guess like quite a few of these are, you vary one, and yeah, I guess it doesn't change any of the other parameters,
Well,
because they're considered
let's say the
fundamental.
speed of
Hey,
light.
hey, Blark, can get just let
This
Alex
one's-
kind of finish
Sorry.
before he turn.
Well, so
continue
there's plenty of ones that I guess like there's from some garbage versions of fine-tuning arguments that will say things like the distance from the Earth to the sun.
Oh yeah, they're terrible.
are-
I agree.
yeah. So those aren't
they're awful.
good. But when we look at the standard model, there are like a set fixed number of like fundamental constants that are not. But then you can say, okay, well, what if some future theory maybe reduces the number of
But
constants?
are they? Do we know that they're actually fundamental? For example, the speed of light is usually given as a fundamental constant. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but that's just kind of like a unit fixing thing. You can just kind of set that.
No.
whatever.
But no. I'm not talking about unit fixing. I'm talking about the fact that there's a physical speed limit in the universe. Doesn't matter what that number is, but it is a number, and it's given as though it's a fundamental constant. But it's no more fundamental than the speed of sound in a medium. So, for example, the speed of sound in water is faster than the speed of sound in air, and the speed of sound in rock is faster than the speed of sound in water. And it has to do with the stiffness parameters of the medium in which it's propagating, and that's exactly the same. The speed of light can be obtained as the square root of permittivity over permeability, two other constants. I think that's the math off the top of my head, but it's something like that. So the speed of light is a function of two other constants, or one of those other constants is a function of the speed of light and the other constant. So these are not. So the speed of light's not a fundamental constant, being that it's derived from other constant things that are considered fundamental constants. You see the problem there? We don't. So we know that about the speed of light. Do we know that about the value of gravity? That gravity doesn't arise from other constants, that more deeper level constants that we don't know. We can't even, we don't know enough about the constants to say what their possible range is and whether they're actually constant and whether they are derived or fundamental. But we're leaping to this conclusion that they are fine-tuned values that can be set. But we don't even know that that's the case. They may just be emergent properties of some other thing, some deeper thing. And we can demonstrate that by looking at the speed of light, which isn't a fundamental constant.
So let's stop there and give John. I think, John, you had some comments.
Sure. There's a few things. One is that I don't think I heard a real response to, or a detailed response into the fact that all evidence would seem to indicate that life as we understand it is far too fragile to exist outside of our own planet. But I think I'm more curious about sort of some of the presuppositions that you're making about the God that you're trying to prove. Is your God beholden to the rules of reality that it created? In other words, you're saying that sort of life exists, therefore this God must exist. But if your God is alive, and I think we talked about this once before, which is that means that you either have to make an argument where this God isn't beholden to its own rules, and therefore you're making a pleading case fallacy, or your God is sort of one data point in an infinite string of creators creating creators. And I've yet to hear a reconciliation of those points from any theist. I don't know if you're necessarily prepared to answer that point right now, but does the question I'm asking even make sense?
Can you repeat it one more time? The
Sure.
second part?
Yeah. Either your God isn't beholden to the. So you're saying that creation, to basically somewhat oversimplify, creation implies a creator, which then would mean that your deity is either an exception to the rule, which means that you're making a pleading case argument, or your deity is just one point in an infinite string of creators creating creators.
Cool.
And so in either case, we either have an absurdist argument of creators creating creators, or we have a pleading case fallacy as the first domino before we even get to the flaws in the argument about the creation that you're arguing was created.
Cool. So is God beholden to like creation and the laws? And I guess so I guess I think one I guess related interesting question is okay, so if the laws of nature are necessary, then there's no world in which God like then I guess the fine-tuning argument is more clear-cut. Would that imply a limitation in God? I don't think so, because yeah, like God would still be
Is your
creating the
God finally tuned?
universe. What?
Is your God finally tuned?
Can you?
Yeah, so you're saying that, so we see, you're saying that the universe has this structure, and so life arose from that structure, therefore there must be this creator that put forth this this structure for this life to exist. So then under what circumstances, what's the framework that created this God?
Yeah, I guess I should have explicitly put in the definition that the God in question here is a necessary God, as like being the relevant case study for a comparison with naturalism.
Right, but you see how that's a presuppositional position. You're presupposing that your God is necessary, therefore your God exists.
So we can just, so it's not an argument that's just God is necessary, therefore God exists. It's a theory comparison where I say, okay, consider a theory where there is, so if it exists, then it is necessary, rather than saying God is necessary, therefore God exists. So if it exists, it is necessary.
That's a pretty big if, isn't it?
Yeah, it's doing a lot of lifting.
What's that?
I think this is a pretty standard consideration. So like, for example, if God created all of space-time, then God would not be like exclusively within time, for example. And so if God, so like there's no point in time in which God does not exist, roughly speaking. Okay, so usually, or there's pretty commonly considered an analogy between all points in time and then all possible worlds, such that like if God exists at all times, or at least there's no times at which he did not exist, then he would exist in all possible worlds. One like framework of modality would entail this, like branching naturalism, I think. So Yeah,
I'm going to apologize. I don't want to. I don't mean to cut you off, except that it feels like you're kind of. It seems like you're kind of drifting away from the answer to my question, which is, are
Yeah, that's
you
that's the transcendental argument,
right?
and
So
you can use it to prove that the best possible island, tropical island, also exists. It's pretty. You already have to
I'm not
believe
giving
that
an
It's
to
argument.
more of
combat.
a modo argument, right?
right.
Well, I'm not
Yeah,
So
giving
it's
an
pretty
we're
bad.
right back. We're right back to. Does your God need to be created in order to be the one creating this universe? And if the answer is no, then you're making a pleading case fallacy. If the answer is yes, then who or what created the God and what created that? And now you're in the infinite string problem, where in either case you can't create you either can't create a first domino, or the first domino is based on a logical fallacy. And that's kind of the problem that I'm having with some of the assumptions that you're making, but presenting not as assumption, but just as, well, this is the pre-accepted framework, so I'm just going to use that. And in
Well,
either
just for the sake of time, I mean, so just to summarize, so I mean, I think this is a basic impasse that happens in a lot of these discussions where
Yeah,
on
you're
the
right.
atheist side, the issue is that who created the God, or what created the God, and on the theist side, the position is that it's a necessary starting point, or the unmoved mover, or the uncaused cause. So I think this happens all the time. One point before we move on, one point that I do want to bring up is, you were talking about kind of the reason, I think, why you think that the world or the universe is finely tuned is that you think that there's kind of a teleological purpose, right, to kind of create I guess us, and the reason why God would want to create us is because God is good, or there's God is trying to create value. Is that right? I'm kind of paraphrasing from what you presented.
Yes, something that's really good and personal would be interested in creating personal moral agents that have value. Yes.
Yeah, and so my question, or objection to that is, the kind of the anthropomorphizing the idea of value, right? It's value to us, but how can we ascribe that to this infinite being who's the unmoved mover and all that, who can create the entire universe and reality? Why would that being have the same kind of values that we would have, who are kind of, to me, at least to me, we're biological beings, and we're ruled by kind of our biology and evolution, and that's where our values come from, and the fact that we're finite and we're going to die, so we value life or survivability. But why would a God kind of share these type of values?
Well, I think he would share the values because those values are just objectively the correct values, at least the ones that are, in fact, the objectively correct values, that's basically the second argument, which is like moral knowledge. That's,
but
yeah,
you're just saying that, right? You're just saying that it's valuable without saying why or how to a God that there's value.
Well, if it's valuable, then it would be valuable to like a good God that believes morally true things, such as the value of persons or something like that. That's not an argument for the value of persons. But like if there is objective moral value, then God would value the things that are objectively morally valuable. And then that's an if that we can also debate.
Well, so it comes. So if I could just make gold, let's say I'm Midas, I can touch anything and make it gold. To me, a like a tiny piece of a gold flake would have no value. I can just make as much gold as I want. So for a creator that can just create beings, ex nihilo or whatever, or set things in motion where time has no purpose or no concern, is outside of time and space. I just don't see, I can't comprehend a being like that holding anything like us, a finite being who's not much, from his point of view, is not much more than just a molecule. Why would that God or that being place any value on something that he can create at his whim?
Well, I don't think God views you as just a molecule or a set of molecules, but a creature of infinite value and dignity, and thus would be have great interest in that.
But that's you. That's you placing that value or claiming that value. But how do you know that a God who can just create things just out of at an instant, why would a being have any value? A human being or anything, right? Even a planet or even a universe, since he can just create a universe out of nothing at any time. Why would any of this have any value for a being like that?
Well, if the thing in question has that value intrinsically, then a creature that believes true things would believe that thing has great value.
Again, it's you, right? You're kind of making, hey, here, you're almost like kind of, trying to justify why something would have value, rather than trying to say, a being, an infinite being. How would an infinite being even have these values?
Yeah, I think we just disagree about like whether or not things have objective value. I suspect that that's really what the disagreement is.
So then, is that objective? Are things good and of value because your God says that they are, or is that value separate from any assessment by your God?
I suspect. I mean, I'm fine with just saying that those things like just have value. It's difficult to.
Okay, so then there's something that's able to create value that has influence outside of and separate from your God's ability to create and assess value.
Well, it's not about creating value. It would still be God that would create the entity that is valuable. But then the question is grounding. Yeah. Like it wouldn't be that the source of, yeah, I mean, like God would still be the ultimate source of like the existence of these valuable things, but that value would be like grounded in something else, grounded in some intrinsic properties or something like that.
So that intrinsic property exists separate from your deity?
I guess that depends on some like Platonistic, if you're like a Platonist or
right. You kind of see where I'm coming from here. Which is,
yeah, if you're a Platonist.
Well, I don't know if I am or not. I mean, I'm not convinced that objective value exists, but whether or not I do, I'm trying to sort of assess where you're coming from on the origin of objective moral value. So, are things objectively moral because your deity says that they are? So, puppies are cute. Let's just take a super dumb and oversimplified answer. Are puppies cute because your God says that they're cute, or are they cute regardless of whether or not your God says that they are?
I'm fine with just the second one. Puppies are cute because they're cuddly,
as am I.
And yeah.
But then doesn't that mean that then that leaves open the possibility of your deity acting in a way that is counter to the intrinsic objective value? So your God can act badly or evil.
Wait, how does that follow?
Because if there's an objective value that is separate from the assessment of your deity, then that means that your deity has the potential to work either in parallel to that intrinsic value or counter to it.
Not if God is necessarily all good, which was
but again, we're right back to where, so then that means that there's a constraint on the existence of your deity. So it's impossible for the deity to act outside of the objective value that it didn't create, that exists separate from its existence.
Let's see. I think I agree. God wouldn't be able to do wrong things. Yeah, I think that would be God couldn't do wrong things, which would be some function of like how it responds to value, how God responds to value in certain ways. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not arguing for an omnipotent deity. You're arguing for the existence of a deity that has some kind of restraint on its power, on its abilities.
So I get those are, I think, different questions. So God can't do morally wrong things is, I guess, some
Why?
version of a constraint.
But why?
Why can't? Because he is all good.
What makes that God all good?
Because that's defining it into existence, just defining that characteristic without any justification for it.
I think that's just the theory we're trying to compare, because, and the reason why we would do that is because we want to look at what predictions this theory has, and the theory predicts things like the existence of life and such and such. But yeah, if we want to consider like mixed mixed value deities, aesthetic, whatever, we can do that. Then we would, I think that would still be still think that would not be atheism in a super interesting sense. But I guess I didn't think you guys would want to go for a personal creator that has
actually before there's a question that Horger had put up. Is it Horger or Horger? I keep forgetting. Horger. Okay, like a GIF, or is it GIF? Anyway, he had a question. If something can be objectively determined, then everybody should be able to make the exact same objective determination independently of each other. Would you agree with that?
Should be able to. I think so, yes. Kind of like we should, even people 5,000 years ago maybe should be able to know that the Earth revolved around the sun or whatever, or maybe like, yeah, hypothetically should be able to, but they didn't have access to X, Y,
just
Z
morality.
things.
Right,
just with respect to morality.
Yeah, so
what was true then should be true now.
Be similar. So we disagree on things now. I think we're making moral progress, and
I get the point you're making. Yeah, I agree. So even if some people thought that slavery was wrong or right in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean slavery isn't objectively immoral, right?
Yes.
But what information do they have access to now? Do we have access to now that people didn't have access to then, which would lead them to that conclusion that slavery was fine then? You can ask a slave, are they having a great time? You can ask a person, do you want to be my slave? So it's really easy in the case of to say, yeah, well, we couldn't tell that the Earth went around the sun back then because that wasn't obvious to us. We didn't have the information necessary. But what information have we gained that wasn't known then about how people liked to be treated, and whether slavery was moral or not?
I think something about I guess the equal value or equal humanity or equal personhood of like I guess all the races, something like that.
Shouldn't that have been the case?
It should have
Shouldn't
been,
people
yes.
have realized you can talk to that person and like there's
Yes.
no information there. There's no new knowledge that that didn't exist. It's a change in morality sans new knowledge.
They should have been able to figure it out. And so the fact that they did not, they are morally culpable for that.
Right, but you keep using the word
Yes.
should, and
But the Bible says slavery is fine. The Bible is absolutely fine with slavery all the way through. So, you know, the authors of the Bible who are meant to be inspired by this God who is perfect, at the very least meant to be inspired by this God who is perfect, couldn't figure that out.
I think I'm really just trying to defend theism here, which I consider special
thing is-
revelation.
But the thing is, when you define, when you try to define theism, you have to define the building blocks of the religion, whatever religion you believe in. And if morality changes over time, then how does it make it good or objective?
I guess I wasn't trying to defend any particular religion here, just the existence of like a good creator.
I think that's fair.
sure, and I'm totally fine with you not defining a specific Christian God, Muslim God, this, that, and the other. We're speaking in sort of a hypothetical deity structure here.
Yeah, more like a universal metaphysical creator, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't think Alex is saying it's hypothetical, right?
Well, okay. Well, I am.
Sure.
But to kind of get back to this idea that objective morality exists, which you say that they should have known, but I'm not hearing how you've determined what somebody should or should not have known.
Yeah, I guess I'm not super intimately acquainted with like the relevant state of scientific and moral inquiry in like the 1800s or whatever to have a really good grasp of it. But I do think, I mean, what was it, blogger? Somebody said talking about, yeah, I can like talk to these people. I don't know, like the scientific stuff was pretty trash about skull size or whatever. We should have thought that those weren't morally significant, things like that, or like even intelligence for individuals should not be considered morally significant.
Here's a place to ask the question if you're wanting to make a comparison of apples to apples as close as you can. You've got the two sides of the US Civil War. They both had the same information. They both had the same rule book. They both had the same history of moral progress to that point. But both of them came to completely opposite conclusions about what the correct answer was. So, yeah, how do we reconcile the inability to get a correct for one of those answers to be the only one that's correct?
This is something that happens, I mean, yes, even in scientific research where, people have the same data and then, they disagree on what the conclusions are. Because these are like open research questions, which doesn't mean there's no objective truth about it. It just means we haven't figured it out yet. So
okay, I'm happy with that. That's a reasonable argument. I see where you're going there. The place I'd ask though is again and I know you don't want to go digging back into the Bible specifically, but based upon your definition from earlier about an all good, massively powerful deity who is also massively knowledgeable. Why doesn't that deity make it more obvious what the correct answer is? There's nothing stopping it from doing it. It has the knowledge, it has the power, and by allowing slavery to continue for like 2,000 years without intervening, that isn't the act of an all-good deity.
I think it seems to me that something kind of analogous with the fine-tuning cases going on here, where it's like where I think how I would summarize it is, naturalism predicts zero moral knowledge, and naturalism predicts like no life, and then theism predicts at least much better some existence of life. But you would say, okay, but like there's not any more life, or like there's inoptimal design, inefficient use of space or whatever, and then in moral knowledge, we could have done like a better job of knowing things. And I think
there's just nothing stopping. See, that's the problem. That's the essence of the problem of evil, is that you've got these three defined characteristics of the deity. The usual scenario is that the deity is all powerful and all knowledgeable. For the problem of evil, the deity does not have to be all good. Just being generally benevolent is sufficient for it to be problematic, as opposed to omnibenevolent. But you've got the essentially the omni in the benevolent slot. But there's absolutely nothing stopping that deity from giving us the knowledge that would be that's waiting, such that the all good could be achieved. So that's the problem. It's a logical problem, whereas the other one, there's lots of other stuff going on there about what we know and what we can't know, and whether the math is right. And but in this case, it's a matter of there is absolutely nothing to stop the God from doing, from updating our understanding of what is moral and what is not, and failure to do so causes harm.
Yeah, I guess I can pull up some thoughts on evil, which is not really.
Wait, let's not get into the problem of evil right now, just because of time. But one thing I want to object to, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but this idea that naturalism doesn't, did you say predict? Was that the word? A morality? I mean,
like objective moral knowledge. I mean,
okay, so objective moral knowledge, but you've already admitted that we can't have objective moral knowledge, right? You're saying, well, in a sense, right? Because you're saying, well, in the past, people didn't know slavery was wrong. And, even now there might be things where we're getting wrong, about trans rights or immigrant rights or whatever, right? So in the future, depending on how things play out, it may be that trans right, it becomes a wrong thing, or it may turn out it becomes a right thing. So right now we can't be absolutely sure, even on the idea of slavery. Who knows that 100 years from now that slavery might be considered moral, right, for whatever reason. So you're essentially saying right now we have no idea that any of what anything is even objectively moral, because it could change tomorrow because of some new knowledge, from your point of view.
Oh, from my point of view, I think it's irrelevant that people disagree about it, just because I think, partially because I think part of the nature of moral disagreement is more like objective disagreements than it is questions of taste. You don't. There's a pretty big disanalogy between being like, oh, I prefer strawberry ice cream. Oh, I prefer vanilla ice cream. Wow, that's terrible. I'm no longer going to be friends with you. Versus like, yeah, maybe Hitler didn't do anything bad at all. Like that kind of disagreement is kind of very, very different, and quite a bit more like, no, I think that there is it's not a faultless disagreement. There's something that you've considered incorrectly in this, and that's what I think. Yeah, that's how I think moral disagreement functions.
But
and it's
you don't know who is correct.
I think I do know that slavery is wrong, and I don't really, I don't care that, like, even if everyone in the world 100 years from now thinks it's okay, like, it's still definitely wrong. And I may not be absolutely certain,
Yeah,
just as I'm not
that's a
absolutely
subjective
certain.
morality. That's not an objective morality.
Well, objective
You've based it
morality,
on what you personally think, not on what is according to an intrinsic objective value.
oh, well, it's also irrelevant what I think. Like, if I, wake up tomorrow and I begin to believe that slavery is okay, then, like, I would be wrong. I wouldn't,
No, but you're saying wrong as if you know for sure what the correct answer is. The question that Neil is asking
yeah.
is, what are the principles that lead you to say that slavery is objectively wrong? Not just because you think it's wrong, but what are the rationale?
Do I need to give, like, the reasons for thinking
Well, if you
slavery is
don't,
wrong?
then it's just your subjective
Okay.
belief.
Okay, well, like, whipping people harms them a lot, and, like, owning someone is inappropriate. The standard
Those are
types
all
of.
you kind of
Alex,
saying.
without getting too graphic, I can tell you I've personally met people that don't mind being physically abused.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can consider consent and all of that stuff, and
I
yeah.
guess so. I think part of the problem that I'm having here is, do you need a God to tell you that slavery is wrong?
No.
Do you need a God to tell you that murder is wrong?
I mean, in the sense that I think you're asking, no, I do not.
Okay. If we can come to these conclusions without a deity, why do we need a deity?
I mean, I guess, like, if by coming to the conclusions without a deity, you mean you're not consciously processing any facts about God when you're coming to these moral conclusions, then I agree that that's, like, perfectly fine manner of moral reasoning for, like, very standard, moral truths. Maybe not all, but that's, like, not the main point here. But, like, if God didn't exist, then what, like, explains our moral beliefs and our moral intuitions is going to be significantly influenced by some, like, evolutionary process.
Yeah,
Evolutionary
that's easily
processes are
explained.
Sure, yeah.
highly, yes.
It's easily explained, and the existence of people with sociopathy and psychopathy is not only explained by it, but expected to exist under evolution. So the existence of evil, as we might term it, is explained and expected to exist under an evolutionary framework, not under an all good framework of a God who has the power to create universes. That's not what would be expected to see.
Yes, there is what is not expected on naturalism, though, is knowledge that is not sensitive to contingent, slightly different evolutionary adaptations over the course of time. So if we had, we can easily see how we might have evolved slightly differently, such that, like, whatever infanticide turned out to be fine because it protected some other tribes or whatever, make up some evolutionary picture. This is like a contingent thing. So there are other nearby possible worlds where our moral intuitions and beliefs would be very different. So given that, a standard condition for knowledge is that it's not highly sensitive in this way. So this seems to undermine having objective moral knowledge. Now,
But I think that's wrong.
Which part?
No. Oh
Because
well,
we do
totally
see
agree.
kind of a consistent set of values that develop, not just in us, but in other animals. This
No.
idea. Okay.
Imagine this, QC. Imagine instead of humans producing one large, highly needy baby, we produced 1 million eggs every time a woman got pregnant per se, and laid them in the stream next to where we were. In that case, it would absolutely be perfectly acceptable for us to even eat some of those small offspring, because they're able to eat food that we couldn't normally get to, and we couldn't exist if there were millions of them popping up in the next generation. You only need, say, 2 to survive to adulthood in the lifetime of the organism in order to propagate the species. So it would be absolutely morally fine for us to not only kill the offspring but also to eat them, and it would be a good thing to do. So as a result, what we tend to see is similar behaviours, because we're looking at similar types of organisms to us. So birds look after their young because they take a lot of work. They don't have lots of them to afford to lose them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so then like an evolutionary naturalism predicts things that promote like more survival value and survival of instincts and genes and stuff, rather than being
And that's what
adapted
we
to
see.
like true moral beliefs.
And we kind of see that.
See that whole range.
And yeah, we do see exactly what you'd expect to see from naturalism. It's absolutely exactly what we'd expect to see. Psychopaths, for example, are considered. You could look at them as a parasite upon the community. So you consider the community as an organism that is trying to survive. The psychopaths and people who won't follow the laws, who don't feel the morals that everybody else does, they're in it just for themselves. But you wouldn't expect to have a large number of them, because they would kill the organism. They'd break the community down, and it would fall apart, and they would die with it. So you'd expect a small number of these things to exist, but not enough to kill the organism. And that's exactly what we sort of see in the numbers of people with that sort of antisocial behaviour in existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't think that naturalism does not predict things like psychopathy or whatever. I don't think it predicts like robust moral knowledge, which would be knowledge that is not sensitive to slight alterations of our evolutionary history that would result in different like moral intuitions and stuff like that.
Alex, I mean, you're just saying this without really anything to back it up. Because I mean, like, okay, just for the first part, why are you saying that naturalism would not predict sociopathy and psychopathy?
Wait, I'm not saying that. I am agreeing
Okay.
that, or I'm,
Okay.
you know.
Sorry, then misheard.
So, Alex, you clearly have given this a lot of thought, and you're and jumping on here and facing all of us is no small feat at all. And so I do want to give full credit and attention to that fact, first and foremost.
Thank you.
But over the course of the evening tonight, there's sort of two key concerns I have about your thesis moving forward. And maybe I've misunderstood, so tell me where I've got my understanding wrong. First of all, when you base your fine-tuning argument on probabilities, and you say that there's this incredibly tiny chance of existence without a deity, but it's still non-zero, so we can't rule out a non-deity answer there. And later in the conversation, you and I agree that it's possible to come to a robust moral structure without a deity. So we don't need we don't need a god necessarily. We don't necessarily need a god for morality, and we don't necessarily need a god for reality to exist. So I'm still not hearing anything that's anchoring your argument for the existence of a god.
Yeah, good question. So I think the main way I would put it is in terms of theory comparison is not just looking at one theory and saying, here's the probability, oh, but it's non-zero, therefore I, can just believe the theory anyway. So we want to look at like all the competing theories on the table, which of these, ends up having like the best chance of explaining things or is the best explanation or something. So like how I would try to draw this, you can debate the analogy, but here's like the analogy just in terms of setting up the theory comparison. So consider like, I'm in Las Vegas and I'm gambling or whatever. I'm at a blackjack table.
Sure.
And yeah, so this dude's killing it. He's winning everything. I haven't really gambled before, so I don't really know how this works. But anyway, so
Sure.
the dude's like getting 21 every single time, and he's like made $1 million or whatever.
Okay.
And so he gets like 21s like 100 times in a row. Or wait, sorry, 21's probably not the best example.
Well, I think it's perfectly fine.
Poker is, I know even less about poker. I've played a few times. But,
you know what? Here, let's use the roulette table.
Sure.
The problem though with arguing with a roulette table is that it's a circular argument.
So
right,
I guess like
And boom boom.
Here's the poker.
So that was the first one today. I think
okay.
I've been really good so far.
Yes, you have.
Sorry, Alex.
Sorry.
But John just derailed you.
That took me a minute. Okay. So I'm playing poker and I get whatever some low probability. What's the highest one? I don't know. But okay.
Royal flush.
Royal flush. There we go. So this guy gets a royal flush like 100 times in a row. That's pretty bizarre. So I consider two different theories. One is it was by chance, and the other is he was cheating in some capacity, or like he was counting cards or whatever. I don't know all the possibilities, but
yeah. No, that's fine. I'm fine with where you're going with this.
Okay, so it's possible that he did it by chance. I can't rule that out. That's a non-zero probability. That could happen sometimes. And it's like, well, I can consider another theory, though. The theory that he was counting cards or he had some assistance or however it is that you can like cheat in
Cool.
there.
Should he be
and it's like,
prosecuted for cheating without direct evidence proving that cheating?
sorry, say that again.
Should he be prosecuted for cheating without direct evidence proving that he cheated?
So I guess I think bringing legal case standards, I think is different than like if I'm just sitting at the table, what should I believe? Because there's like a presumption of innocence and things like that, which I think is not relevantly similar to like the theistic atheistic case.
Sure, but again, so which is the simpler answer, and how do we determine which is simpler? So in order for him to cheat, there would have to be you have to add on assumptions in order to assume that he's cheating rather than concluding that he's lucky. So for Occam's razor to be applied here, now does him winning 20 times in a row with a royal flush each and every time pass my sniff test? No, it doesn't. But you see how we have to add assumptions to draw the conclusion that he cheated, as opposed to he's just really flippin' lucky.
Yes. So
you're adding assumptions to the probabilities of the universe to draw the conclusion that a deity did it.
So which assumptions do you have in mind exactly? Which assumptions do you have in mind exactly? I'm just thinking about the theory. Yeah, right, I guess like one theory is going to be like actually a lot more probable at some point than the other.
And part of the difficulty in statistical analysis is how do we determine which assumptions are more valid than the other, and how do we test for that? Because in all of this, what I'm not hearing, we're hearing assumptions okay, we have two assumptions. Let's just boil this down. We have one assumption that the universe started by without a deity at all, and one that started with a deity. Well, we can test to determine. We can create science. We create falsifiable hypotheses to come to these conclusions. And so far, every single time that you assume a God, well, how do you test for a God? How do you make God a falsifiable claim? And that's what I've not heard in how you created the probable framework that caused you to say, okay, well, it's really tiny that it happened without a God, therefore it must be God.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the falsifiability?
Well, in the sense of like strict deductive falsifiability, that doesn't exist for like really any philosophical theory, naturalism, theism, etc. And like, philosophers like pretty universally would reject falsifiability as even for like scientific theories, because you have like anomalies and standard model, and so the like deductive falsifiabilities pretty widely rejected, but some like limited version. So you do need to be able to make like probabilistic assessments. So like some version of evidential falsifiability, maybe we could call it. And that's what I think like exactly what the fine tuning argument is. So this is like an evidential asymmetry between theism and atheism that I think is a kind of test of sorts. So it's not going to be an empirical test because but that's not really a strike against it, because there's a lot of philosophical, the entire field of philosophy of quantum mechanics trying to figure out interpretations of which interpretation is correct, rely on philosophical differences between empirically equivalent theories. So there's like, if we want to try to make an empirical test, then I think we're going to be not just come up empty-handed, but I think that'd be super misleading and not something that even like other very benign philosophical theories
and there's a lot of philosophy that I somewhat derisively but also somewhat tongue-in-cheek referred to as sort of philosophical navel-gazing, which serves a function because it does cause one to make sure that they're thinking in a philosophically rigorous way. Where I think my concern is, once you get into the realm of outside of just pure thought experiment and into the world of like scientific evidence, where you start talking about the physical world, and what you then run into is, okay, how then? When is there enough evidence to start saying, okay, this seems true? And the assumptions that you're making sort of at the end of the day sort of seem to be, okay, well, this is really unlikely. And because the fine tuning is so narrow, therefore it had to be a deity. And
just that it makes a lot more sense that way when
there's an analogy in the comments which might help get us to a better place. You made the analogy, Alex, of a person winning whichever game, it doesn't matter, or getting a whole big pile of royal flushes. One person getting a whole big pile of royal flushes. That just assumes that there's only one single universe, that this is the only place that exists. But the multiverse, which I think I mentioned earlier, is a lot more like the question that Tuna Man asked, which is, or the analogy Tuna Man made, which is that if a person won the lottery, did he cheat? And so, yes, one universe won the lottery and has life in it. But there's millions of rolls of the dice there. So, that's a perfectly, that's the argument that needs to be compared against, because it does appear to me that that it makes no sense for only one universe to exist. That a multiverse is a much more logical structure.
But even if you have, but even if you only have one universe, but even if you have only
You have other
universe,
problems.
Yeah. So the idea.
So I'm going to wrap it up here. I mean, one of the things I wanted to raise was the puddle argument as well. But however, Richard, the hopeful agnostic, had a long question. I'll pose it, but I don't think we're going to have time to even talk about it. But he was asking about the fine-tuning argument. That is a relatively strong argument in favor of theism, simpliciter. I'm actually not quite sure what that point is. If and only if these values are variable. But do we have enough insight into these values to confidently say that they are variable? Is it not possible that they can only take on a very few restricted values, or even that the ones we have detected are the only ones able to be taken? And that was another thing I was going to raise, but I'll just put it out there for now, because I do want to end it here, because I know, Alex, you have two more components, and I think maybe even like another piece at the end, maybe the conclusion. So I don't know with your schedule whether you're going to be able to come back next week or the week after, but we can schedule something.
Yeah, I could probably come back next week.
Next week.
But yeah, we can talk about moral knowledge and objective morality. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
but
we kind of came into it a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
No, and and again,
Richard, I was just going to say, if Richard wants to drop that question into the comments section of the video, I'm happy to actually jump in on it. I'll probably defend Alex's position against against the question. So ironically, so jump in there and and if it doesn't get successfully answered before Alex is on next, then
One quick thing about the multiverse is that I think if we're going to try to reason about the multiverse, our entire epistemology pretty quickly gets broken into shambles, because multiverse just like entails everything. And so we have like no way to really reason about what kind of universe we're supposed to be in, because everything's just probability 1. So this is like the whole measure problem.
I'm not a big fan of it either.
Yeah, I'm really happy with it because of the way in which we look at everything. We look in this universe it has this quantum nature to it, and there's multiple ways to sort of cook that fish as well. When it looks at how that sort of becomes a multiverse. So there's also wave collapse versions that would result in this universe the moment the wave function generates a brain that's strong enough to cause that wave function to collapse. That's a whole other fun way of looking at it. It doesn't have a multiverse in it, but we'll leave that fun guy for some other time, I think.
Alex, I do have one question, and I do not want an answer this week. I want the next time that you come on, I'd love to get an answer on this.
It's a homework question.
Yeah, there you go. Which is, where did your deity get the materials to make the universe?
Cool.
I would
from
love
nothing.
to hear.
It's from nothing.
Yeah,
from nothing
right.
or from God, either way.
So because that's a whole different way of, because that's a whole nother problem that I have with even the concept of a deity, and why it just logically makes no sense to me. But that is not a conversation to start right now. We're way over time.
Hey, John. Ironically, there's a physics answer to your question, that it looks like this universe actually contains 0 total energy.
All right.
So it's perfectly balanced and flat. So to the limit of our ability to measure, it looks like the gravitational energy is perfectly balanced by the matter/energy mass of the universe. And if those are 2 separate parts of the same thing, then energy is just a separation of the energy from the gravitational potential energy. So you don't need to actually You don't need to start with any matter in order to create matter.
So
Hilarious.
it's like a very, very complex equation where when you start canceling everything out, you just get to 0 equals 0.
You get back to 0, yeah. So the universe
Yeah.
started with 0, and it has its own, and it has a total of 0 energy in it. And there's really good evidence for that thing. You can look it up in Wikipedia, 0 energy universe. It's a good one.
All right.
There's all kinds of fun little rabbit holes to go down.
Yeah.
All right. You're holding me back from.
I'm sorry.
Adding this
Sorry,
down.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yep.
Alex, next week I would love to talk to you some more about your answer to that question and kind of get some feedback on that.
Cool.
But,
Thanks.
I'll
again
have
for
to
the
say
discussion.
this was a very interesting discussion, and
Yeah, it's good.
and this is a really good example of where you can have a civil discussion,
Yeah.
even when people disagree. So I know I get a lot of pushback from people on Twitter saying that, when I invite them on is so I don't know, to ambush them or something. Anyway, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Alex, thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
And,
Alex, wonderful conversation, man.
yeah,
Yeah,
this
thanks
is
for
Good
having
one
me.
of
again,
the better ones, and we had some good discussions in the live chat as well. And Richard, I do invite you to come back if you're possible, if it's possible, as well as others here. But with that said, I will bid everyone a happy Easter's Eve, or for some people, actual Easter. So,
Yeah.
so I'll see everyone next week. See ya.
All right, y'all, be well.
See ya.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.